Hello, it's Regina. Welcome back to my haunted library. So today I wanted to join in on something that was started maybe a couple weeks ago. I'm kind of coming in late to this, but better late than never, right? And that is the Cancelathon Readathon. So from what I gather from this is that this is a look at books that have been what would be called canceled in recent time, whether it's a Twitter flare up that is putting into the spotlight a particular book that maybe is labeled problematic, which we've seen happen many times, and it's continuing to happen on Twitter. And also to look at maybe some books in the past that have been banned. So I don't really get involved too much in these debates, but I do have some very strong feelings about creative freedom. And that is, I'm all for it. I don't believe in barring anyone's voice, whether you agree with it or not. I do believe that there should be more room for all voices, not just a dominant kind of point of view, but that one should not cancel out the other, if that makes sense. Do I believe that certain books should be maybe come with like a warning? There's nothing wrong with labeling books as mature. Maybe it's deemed unacceptable for young people, and that makes sense. But I think as far as, the general debate goes, it should be up to the individual to decide what he or she wants to read. And in the case of a child, maybe their parents, over Twitter. So that's just my maybe unpopular opinion. It kind of reminds me of a few instances where I've come across some in my own life, before the internet with this idea of a banned book. I remember a friend of mine was a high school English teacher, and she had recommended to one of her students a book that was from an author that was a big part of like my teenage years, and that's Kurt Vonnegut. Like when I was in high school, all the cool kids were reading Vonnegut. So she had recommended to one of her students Breakfast of Champions, which was in the school library. So the kid checked out the book, and his mother found the book. And if you're familiar with the book, you know that there's a very interesting little doodle in just a little line drawing in that book. And the mother freaked out when she saw it and demanded that this book, this horrible book that was so bad for her child, would be removed from the school library. So this whole thing just turned into this big debate, and I'm sure it was a very interesting board meeting over that illustration. Now, I don't remember exactly what happened, but I remember that the librarian was being very staunch about trying to keep this Kurt Vonnegut book in the high school library. So this is not a new thing. It's just that on Twitter, it kind of becomes like I don't know, a large debate without debate. It just seems to be a lot of pointing and labeling and not a lot of discussion, which is discouraging. So this graphic, I really like this idea. So it kind of works as like a tic-tac-toe where you have to go through the center. And the center book that everyone participating in this is supposed to read is So You've Been Publicly Shamed by John Ronson, which I've already read. So I already have that one down. I listened to it. I guess that's considered reading. I listened to it on the audiobook was on YouTube for free. So I don't know if it's still there, but I listened to it, I think in the summer, and I thought it was great and very thought-provoking and gave a different spin on this kind of public shaming that happens sometimes, well, a lot of times on Twitter and other social media. So I definitely wanted to do a problematic classic, but I wasn't sure which one. And then just by chance this morning, as I was walking past my little library box in my town, I came across, just sitting there, The Sorrows of Young Werther by Goethe. And I thought, aha, I love this book. I've read it many times before. I've studied it. I'm going to read this again as my problematic classic. Now, this book came out in, let me get my date right, 1774, and it is it kind of marked the beginning of the Sturm und Drang movement, which was pre-Romanticism, but it kind of ushered in the Romantic age in art and literature. And it was a rebellion, in a way, against the rational philosophies of the neoclassical period, and embraced a emotion, overpouring emotion that kind of spilled out in this work, where it's a short story, well, it's maybe a novella, about a young man who falls in love. It's a story of unrequited love, and all of the suffering this young man goes through. And just to give a spoiler, so spoiler alert if you haven't read the book, jump ahead. But Werther ends up killing himself at the end of the book because he is so distraught over this unrequited love. And as I recall from the book, he just continues to stay in a situation where he's going to be rejected, and each moment in time that he's moving through his humiliation is just another cut and another cut and another cut away at his heart and his spirit, until he finally finds no other solution but to end his life. So the reason why Sorrows of Young Werther was a problematic book is because it was banned for a time, because there were all these copycat suicides where young men were killing themselves dressed like Werther and clutching a copy of the book to their chest. And this was considered problematic because it was encouraging this kind of behavior. Now, one could argue, that a book or an idea is not the cause of someone to kill themselves, which would be my argument. But, there are people who disagree. They think it's a dangerous idea. We should be teaching different types of morals, and rationality should prevail, not emotion. But you will see in history, in politics, which I'm not that interested in, but certainly in art and literature, which I am interested in, and music, these different pendulum swings and different directions between different philosophies. And once something becomes too, let's say, emotional, then there's a need for some kind of a rational thinking to kind of keep things in order and to contain a sort of chaos. So then you have that going, and then that becomes too restrictive, and then it goes in the other direction. So you can't really restrain human emotion, and you can't really restrain art, nor should you. So I am going to be reading Sorrows of Young Werther, and I will do a review at the end of this book, at the end of the Cancelathon, and tell you what I think, and I'd be interested to read this now because it's been many years since I've read it, so I probably will have a different point of view. For example, when I was just a wee lass college student, so it was my husband, who was my boyfriend at the time, so we were living in sin, and his best friend, the three of us living together in a flat, and being very left bank in the city of Richmond, Virginia. So the left bank of the James River, I guess you could say. And we smoked a lot of clove cigarettes, and we listened to a lot of Billie Holiday albums, and we talked about art a lot. And on our roommate's shelf was a copy of Tropic of Cancer by Henry Miller. And I read that, and this was the first time I had ever read anything like that, and it kind of blew my mind. And I remember, because I was so, a young woman, being upset at the language that he used to describe women, which was basically the C word every chance he had. And, it offended me in a way that made me want to keep reading, And then later, Henry Miller kind of became, in a way, sort of a hero for me, because he was somebody who I was very interested in and kind of wanted to figure out what he was thinking and why, even though I did find it offensive. And he was somebody who, just really fought against his own, the society. He really fought against the restrictions of the society that he was in, which was America in the early 20th century, moving to Paris and exploring a creative freedom, which many people don't have the courage to do. Now, you could say that he was a chauvinist and a jerk, and yeah, he was probably, but as I thought about his work more, and the older I got, I kind of saw him more as somebody who was fighting against his own emotions and sexual drive and trying to make sense of it, outside the realm of what would be considered, your standard way of living and what society would consider to be a proper way of life. Now, that book was banned for many years for being obscene. And it is definitely shocking, but am I glad I read it? Yes, I'm glad I read it. And it totally changed my point of view in a lot of ways and helped me synthesize what I thought about this kind of language and about how certain men, I'm not saying all men, but certain men view women. And that was very, I guess, educational in a way. So, and for Henry Miller, he looked like he died with a smile on his face. So, who's to judge him, right? So this is how I think about these things. So back to the Cancelathon. So I'm going to do Soros Young Werther for my classic. I'm going to skip over So You've Been Publicly Shamed because I already read it. And then for my forced diversity, read a diverse book. Well, I'm going to choose a book that has been on my shelf for probably a year that I have not opened, and that is Black Leopard, Red Wolf by Marlon James. So I've seen so many different takes on this book. Some people say this is absolute trash and is problematic and should be avoided, and it's violent and rapey and weird. And then other people saying it's genius and it should be included in this classic canon of literature. So there are very strong opinions about this book. And that sounds like the type of book that I would like to read. So this will be, I probably will start, I'm finishing up 2 books and I'm going to start this one next probably, and then I can probably read this one in a day or less. So those are the books that I'm going to be reading for Cancelathon. I want to thank the booktubers who put this together. I think it's a fabulous idea. And I'm looking forward to seeing what other people read and what their thoughts are about these problematic books. So that's all I have for today. Thanks for stopping by my haunted library, and I'll see you soon. Bye.